Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our podcast, Moms on the Move. I'm Jen Wells.
And I'm Ashley Steigerwald.
And we have marriage therapist Caroline Pennell with us today.
Hello.
So we are excited to have you here.
Yes.
Excited to be here.
On our New Year's resolution one, we discussed trying to be sweeter wives.
Yes.
Oh,
So
great.
step one.
That is a great first
Therapy.
Therapy.
No, it's always a great place to start is with yourself. Like,
Yes.
I want to be a better person. You know?
There you go. So how long have you been doing this?
Oh, gosh. Since 2016.
Okay.
So I guess I'm on my 5th year.
Okay.
Nice.
Yep. And grew up here, moved back to Greenville in 2020, literally 2 weeks before COVID started. Had my first client on March 2nd.
Oh my gosh.
Shut down shop 2 weeks later. So, yeah. And I mean, we got it back up and running once we kind of figured out what COVID even was. But, yeah.
So you have your own practice. Okay.
My own practice. I worked for a group practice in Nashville and then kind of went
And
off
where are
on
you
my own.
located?
Church Street. So
Okay.
Downtown.
Downtown.
Kind of in the thick of everything in a cute little brick building.
Cute. Awesome. So, we need all the help. I know I need all the
need
help.
all the
It's like, where to
therapy.
even begin?
My husband's
all
going to
the
be like,
therapy.
are you listening?
Right. And that's the problem. It's marriage therapy. So
Yes.
there's only so much we could do with just you two. They
Well, I
have
thought
to be in
that
here too.
your first comment, you start with yourself. And I was like, ooh, because I've always heard that, you can't change other people. You can't,
You're like, oh.
you can control yourself, your reaction and your actions.
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so much freedom if you can really believe that and act upon it. And
It's
know that-
hard to act upon it.
Oh yeah. Self-disclosure is one of my favorite tools as a therapist,
Yes.
but I will be frank, I struggle with it. I know textbook wise exactly what to do, and it's hard to be like, nope, my reactions, what I do, it's all up to me.
Yeah. And I think, marriage, probably a lot of people are struggling now because you're always with your spouse, and
Yeah.
like the other day, Chris came in and he was chewing with gum. And I was like,
legit. That's
"Dear
a legit
God,
reason
man."
to freak
Like,
out.
I can't.
I'm
I was trying to
sorry.
have a conversation and I was like, stop. I'm going to rip
Yes.
that out of your mouth.
Yes. No,
So,
my husband is the same way for me. He has an issue with chewing. So I learned that one really quickly, and it was painful to be on the receiving end of that.
Oh.
Well, I think so. The first 2 years you're dating, everything's super fun and
You
nothing's
dated for 2
annoying.
years?
No. We dated for longer, but I'm saying the first 2 years is
Of
usually
marriage.
that in general, just meeting
Okay.
someone. I feel like our first year of marriage was kind of.
I thought it was hard. I thought the
thought it was
first year of
hard,
marriage
too.
was
but
hard.
people say that the first year was the hardest, and I was talking to a friend about that not long ago, and he was like, if the first year is your hardest, you're doing really well, because it's
Yeah.
all uphill from there. But it's
I
tough.
think it's hard
definitely
too. This is your first, you said?
Yes, first baby.
She's about to
I'm
have
very
baby, so I don't want to say. I think after having our first baby, I changed
Yes.
as a person.
Yes.
And, I think that my attention obviously gravitated towards just being the caretaker, and Bennett was my pride and joy, the only one. I really Chris came in a pretty big second. So our marriage changed in that respect. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Oh, no.
No, the type of therapy I do relies a lot on research, so it's not just my opinion and I think this, but it's Gottman method. Have you heard of Gottman? John Gottman. He's kind of paved the way
Research.
in our field, but studied thousands of couples, and he says about 2/3 of couples struggle significantly within the first 3 years of having a child. And whether it's your kid is your distraction of now we don't have to address conflict because I got to deal with this baby,
Right.
or we have to pretend like things are okay for the sake of the baby. It's just really common that couples get disconnected.
Yeah. And I think too, you feel I remember, obviously this is a lot of TMI, but
No.
the intimacy part.
Oh, yeah.
It was very hard for me to get back to that point because I didn't feel like myself. I was breastfeeding for a year, and then I was basically pregnant again after that, and then I was breastfeeding for a year, and then I was pregnant after that. So you're kind of just you feel you don't feel real sexy.
100%.
No.
And you go from the sexy girlfriend, fiance, new wife to mom.
Yeah.
And all of the connotation that comes with it, you know, looking at your own, you know, relationship with your parents, looking at your body and the way it looks totally different after having kids and
Getting Facebook reminders of what you used to look like.
no
Like,
joke.
oh.
But it was that I know I struggled with the identity after having
Yes.
my first son.
And it's important. Your identity is not just mom, but
That's
the
right.
reality
I know.
is, I mean, you're 24/7 mom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, forever, but at least legally for the next 18 years,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and I think
And it's
also that
hard.
brings into like another topic, because I was like trying to look up the most common issues that people go to for a marriage therapist. One of them was the power, well, number one, a power struggle, but also like what's the word I'm looking for? When it's not equal at home.
Inequity?
An imbalance.
Imbalance.
Yeah.
Imbalance of duties at home, which leads to a lot of like resentment.
Yes.
And I think as a parent, a lot of women can relate to this
Yes.
because, you know, there's a lot of expectations on you as a mom, but then you're also have other expectations to be the sexy wife. And then,
But these are expectations we put on ourselves.
yeah, I think it's also, though, ingrained in our culture. I think that it is on ourselves, but it's also, we need to start you can't do all of this,
No.
you know, and
Yeah. And you can't, I mean, I think it's both. And like we have a responsibility to address our own feelings and resentments instead of try to mind read. Like, oh, is this what my husband wants of me? Like, does he want me to be the perfect housewife and the perfect mom and the perfect spouse? You know, being able to have those conversations will likely, I mean, if your husband's decent, alleviate a lot of, you know, your fears and concerns. And then, yeah, it's really tough. So having compassion for yourself and knowing that you're not superwoman, you can't physically be perfect in all of these areas. Being able to just, you know, reduce the perfect standards that the expectations that you have of yourself will.
I have a hard time
help a
like
lot.
delegating duties. Like for some reason, even if my mom would come visit, she'd say, I'll get up with the baby. And I'm like, no. Like, I've got it.
Yeah.
So then I wasn't allowing Chris, and it kind of created a cycle a little bit of me doing a lot of the mom stuff. And then unfair to him, probably then resenting him for me being
Right.
the, you know.
Oh, it's so tough. And couples do come in a lot. The couples that have maybe, they've been making it work for years. So it's maybe, you know, you're 7+ years into a relationship and you're like, we're just not quite happy. Like, I can't even really pinpoint that one issue. There's just a transactional relationship. You do this, I do this, and there's just such divisiveness there. But the reality is, like, we have different strengths than our spouses, and we need to play into those strengths, and we also need to help each other cultivate their weaknesses. And so how do you do that? You let go of some control. You know, my husband, we've got our first baby due in 2 months essentially. And we were babysitting our new nephew. And so it was, you know, his first exposure around a baby, and he did the diaper, he burped the baby, like he did everything. And I just sat there on my hands. I was like, oh my gosh, like I maybe would have done that a little differently, but did he get the job done? Absolutely. Was the baby fine? Absolutely. And so it's hard to take that step back, especially when it's your strength. But if you take the reins on everything, you know,
And you also are setting the tone for expectations, I think.
Yes.
If you've been doing it for so long. I mean, I did it with my 3 kids. It was the same thing. Like, no, I got it because I know the babies want me. So, you know, then I think it actually made the babies want me because I was always the one.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
it's hard, but it is like, I think it's hard to get out of that.
So figuring out with your spouse, what are their strengths? Like mine, I already know he is going to be great at playing with the kids.
Yes.
Like that is his strength. He's a daredevil. Like he's going to be teaching them probably any and everything I don't want him to teach them, but they're going to have so much fun. And I'm like, that's going to be your area. And there are going to be times where I wish I was that person.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
But
yes.
I can join in on that, but don't want to take it away, because then we're back to that transactional of like, well, I do this amount of playtime and this amount of teaching, and you do this amount of bath time, and that can just get really painfully structured.
Yeah.
And then when that happens, I think there's a lot of disappointment too, when people can't meet those expectations.
Yep. What are you seeing people come in a lot for?
I would say there's two primary things. So it's really a loss of connection and an inability to manage conflict, have healthy conflict. So those two things, you know, whether it's we've been struggling with this for 6 months or we've been struggling with this for 20 years, I think you're at the core of almost all problems.
What is healthy conflict?
So what kind of
What does healthy conflict look like?
So conflict's obviously unavoidable.
Yeah.
And Gottman, again, one of his statistics that he learned was almost 70% of conflict is perpetual and unresolvable. So it's not about how do we resolve this conflict, but it's really about how do we have disagreements in our relationship without it dictating like our well-being, our marital satisfaction. So really delivery is huge. And that one is tough. And so what that comes down to is, can I regulate my emotions? You know, can I have
talking directly to me?
Yes.
Are you feeling victimized?
I've actually done a lot of research on you.
Did my husband call you?
Yeah. I hope you filled out all the paperwork, because we're actively doing therapy. It's being able to not have such a doom and gloom. And a fear, I think, is, you know, at the core of a lot of issues of like, if we don't resolve this conversation, like, what does that mean for our marriage? What does that mean for tomorrow? When that's operating, oh my goodness, it's so hard to have a healthy conversation. So really what it comes down to is, can I be gentle? Can I receive information without getting defensive? That's where I struggle the most.
Feedback is...
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I can dish it out all day. But it is hard to receive. And so having the humility and the calmness to know, like, you know, my husband can love me and also have, you know, an issue. You know, both can exist simultaneously. So, I would say eliminating criticism, eliminating defensiveness, having a culture of appreciation. So if you just appreciate each other, like on a day-to-day, the small stuff, then when the conflict happens, it's like we have this foundation, like we're in it together.
There's evidence that you love and care for one another because the actions are there. So you have the evidence that you'll work through it.
Yes. And that's, I mean, usually when a couple comes in, one person is not happy to be there. Like they're like, well, I don't know how I feel about couples therapy. I'm here because my spouse wanted it. And a lot of times that fear is that we're going to spend the next 15 minutes just talking about everything you've ever done wrong.
Right.
And it's not about that. It really is about, you know, where are our strengths and where are our weaknesses, and how can we talk about our weaknesses without crumbling? And the thing is, they're in there, they're both sitting on the couch, so they're already taking a really strong, positive first step of, we're in this together. And when you're in it together, like, conflict is much more manageable.
You said the strengths and weaknesses. I don't know if you remember one. So we recently did a podcast, and I was saying on there, the therapist had us like years ago write down what we think our strengths and weaknesses are, and what we think, and rate. We had to like basically give a grade. And it was very eye-opening. But I got an A in cleaning and an F in romance.
Okay. That's painful.
Was it? I don't know. I guess
the grade just an F of like failure,
like total failure, and
there's room for improvement. You know,
I could need like a D+. But then I like rated him the exact opposite. It was like F in cleaning, A in romance. So like we balance.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I do know like my weaknesses, and but I still don't want him to tell me them.
It's so hard, but it's so valuable. And my husband and I, we've made a game out of it where sometimes we will sit there, and having humor is one of the best ways to have healthy conflict too, is to be able to talk about hard stuff, maybe not in the heat of the moment, but like we were talking about things we're really bad at. And like, you know, we're sitting there and, you know, we both are struggling with what we're really bad at. And the other person's like, you're bad at parallel parking. You're bad at, you know? But being able to just be human.
Yeah.
And when you feel like you're, you know, you're battling your partner, sometimes you don't want your humanness to show because it's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Vulnerability, and at least for me, it's that fear of vulnerability, because then the shame factor comes in. Because if I am vulnerable and I'm rejected, or you find fault in my vulnerability, then I personally tend to go to shame first. That I am not good enough. I'm a bad person. And when you look at your actions, you're like, you're not really a bad person, but I tend to really internalize it. And so that's something that I have to constantly work on, is that I may screw up and do bad things sometimes, but I'm not an inherently bad person.
Right.
You're
And
not a bad person.
no, you know, I just met you, and you're definitely not a bad person.
But shame is very, very real.
It
very
is.
real.
And the most common tendency for people that are experiencing shame is withdraw, hide, you know, maybe over apologize for stuff they're not, you know, I'm sorry, I'm just such a bad person. And then they like go into hiding. So what you need to do is identify, you know, check the facts, not my feelings, because sometimes your feelings just get really twisted. And so what are the facts of the situation? I know, you know, my husband's been with me for 10 years. We love each other. He's imperfect. He's, you know, there've been plenty of examples where I've messed up and we've had an issue and then we resolve it. Like, those are facts. Your feelings don't fit the facts. Okay, act opposite. Do the opposite. Like, step out and be like, I'm feeling shame because of this, and it's scary to be vulnerable, but I, for the sake of our relationship, want to come forward and just talk to you about this. Like that, each time you do it, it gets a little easier, but wow, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It is hard to do. Yeah.
Is there a good place that you, I remember reading one time, like, it's always wise to have a conversation in the car.
Yes, it is.
Is that true?
And they can't escape.
They can't escape, and you're also not like staring at each other like.
Yes, and walks are another one.
Walks.
And there's something, walks are nice because you're both actively doing something else, which can calm your nerves. And yeah, it can be a lot easier to have a conversation when you don't have to just stare each other down.
When it's side by side, it's maybe less threatening.
Yes, it could be less threatening. I make really intense eye contact sometimes, and so, you know, I'm sure it's nice to be able to just do something else. And there's, have you heard of EMDR?
It's
the tapping.
The tapping,
Yes,
yeah.
and so it's a growing form of trauma therapy, and but there's a bilateral stimulation, which is like basically where you're tapping on your legs, you're tapping on your arms. Walking kind of simulates that, so it can actually calm you down while you're having the conversation.
Interesting.
Another little like tidbit fun fact is when your heart rate is over 100 beats per minute, you can't have a conversation anymore. So when you start to get escalated, you go in one direction, fight, flight, freeze, whatever. I'm a fighter. My husband, he's a freezer. He shuts down, which is stonewalling. And so walking can be another way to help just get some of that energy out so that it's not elevating your heart rate.
Right.
You know.
Or like a full sprint.
Yes.
Over 100
right?
beats per minute.
So I've been reading about like the fight, flight, or freeze, and the whole idea that you have to finish out that process, and that a lot of people will go into freeze, and then when you know, I've heard the rabbit scenario where like the rabbit freezes and then shakes it off, and then when you're not able to shake it off, like you internalize it as trauma. So I found that really interesting, the whole idea of working all the way through the emotion and not stopping at the freeze part.
Yes, that's super important because when you freeze and you don't finish it, what it's communicating to your brain is, thank goodness I stopped, because think of how bad it could have gotten, you know, if I kept going. And so finishing it out is what basically communicates to your brain that like, oh, this is not nearly as dangerous or as scary as, you know, what my feelings are telling me it is. So that's definitely a great idea. For some people though, you know, you want to factor in, you know, how am I talking to my partner? Like, you know, they can only receive.
Depends.
Yeah.
Depends. If it's a small thing, like I'm like, let's just fight and get it over with. If it's a big thing, I'm one of those like, and what you talked about with the heart rate, where I know when I hit my point where it's not going to be productive, and then I need my space to get where I can talk about it in a comfortable way. Because then, yeah.
And the most important thing is, I understand wanting to take a step back because it's like, where we're going is just going to get ugly, not productive. So for the sake of the conversation and your partner's well-being, taking a step back, but communicating when you're going to come back is the most important thing. Because if you've ever, been having a fight and someone shuts down and walks away, what do? You get louder, you get bigger, you chase after them. But if that person were like, I need 30 minutes to calm down, I will be back in 30 minutes.
And then the other person's like, well, I'm going to keep writing about what I hate about you.
And then that's the most important part is not just building your case.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this 30 minutes.
That's right. Here's 30 reasons why you're just completely wrong.
I mean, like, that's time to get like a whole Supreme Court case together for me. I'm like, evidence.
Yeah, if you
Witnesses.
can get rid of criticism, the facts matter. So have your facts, but where it becomes an issue is when you're communicating, hey, there's something inherently wrong with your personality. What's wrong with you? You're always late for dinner. What's wrong with you? That second part is the one that is painful. But if you're, saying, hey, it makes me sad that you're late. I want to spend more time with you. Like, what is it that I want? Why does this bother me? If you can get to that piece,
Right.
you're on the receiving end of I just want more time with you. That feels nice.
And instead of like attacking, saying this is how it makes me feel.
Yes. Which is tough. I have a little template, and it's I feel blank about blank. You don't know how often people, myself included, will be like, well, I feel like you're a bad person because you do. And I'm like, well, that's not an emotion. Like, backtrack, let's try again.
Right.
And, it's very tempting to put an action or a thought in where your feeling goes. And why? Because feelings are vulnerable. And especially, have you ever seen the anger iceberg? Where it's like anger is the ice tip that you see above the water, and then there's a big ice piece
Loneliness, isolation.
and it's all of the other more vulnerable emotions.
So anger's a result of
Yes, it's a secondary emotion. It's the only emotion that doesn't require vulnerability. It says you did this, blah blah blah. It has nothing to do with you.
Wow.
And so that one is tough. Taking the time to like sit back and think, why does this bother me? Is there more than just anger? That's something each person can do. And it's helpful to come into a therapist's office so that the therapist can help you get there. Because sometimes, you're just seeing stars and you're so angry that it can be tough to get beneath the surface.
And is it true? Obviously I do believe this, but like the way you grew up, do you touch on that? Is that important to you, or is it more like how you are now?
Me, like the way I grew up,
or the way that like you help people? Do you touch back onto how they grew up?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that is an intervention in itself. So, I get a lot of infidelity cases. So someone comes in, someone has cheated on another person, and we will get an extensive history. And a lot of times the issues that are showing up that maybe led to one person straying or led to years of disconnection, they existed before they met each other. And the thing is, we attract people that we balance out with. And so a lot of times it's, kind of that perfect recipe of, I have the tendency to withdraw and go do impulsive things to feel something. And then I have the tendency to mask everything and act like it doesn't exist. Like those work perfectly until disaster erupts. So it is helpful for people to recognize, okay, like the issues that I brought in, they're multi-generational. It's how was I raised? How were my parents raised? When you can look back and see there's really no reason to sit there and blame one person. You need to take ownership for things that you do, and also have the compassion to think, okay, this didn't just show up out of nowhere.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I think it's 50% of marriages end in divorce. But I think it's like very important to know that no one and no marriage is perfect. Yeah. And you'll never hit that perfection.
No. Yes. And I think that's why it is so important to just be human, recognize you have a contract, a piece of paper, whatever you want to call it. You have a contract, so you're in it. Like you're in it for better and for worse. There are going to be times that are really hard, and if you're committing as a couple to, be proactive. And that's a hard piece. Is a lot of people come in and it's been, a decade of not being proactive. And so you got to kind of like, expedite the process a little bit to get up to current date. But if you're proactive and working together, then the imperfection is not that painful.
Right. I like to remind Bill that he's legally obligated to love me.
Yes, legally obligated.
You are legally obligated to love me.
Yes.
What do you think little things are to be proactive, not reactive, that would help?
Well, I mean, for starters, the most proactive thing you can do is premarital therapy. So go before you're even married. I would say go before you're even engaged. Like, because engagement is kind of, we've committed to this.
Yeah.
But start having those conversations from day one. Normalize it, instead of, having those very closed-end questions on first dates of like, oh, do you like that band? Like, yes or no? Like, start talking about finances, talk about your values, things that are important. And so that's the most proactive thing that you can do.
Did you do premarital?
We did not.
You did?
Well,
okay.
We kind of did early on. It was pretty much the first year we ended up going.
We were required to.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because it was like a weekend-long retreat was part of it. It was like the end of it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so and it was a huge group. I mean, there were maybe over like 80 couples. And on one of the exercises, they had you sit back to back and you had a red card and a green card. And they would ask questions and you would hold up the red or green and then you'd turn around and see what your partner did.
Oh, wow.
And we were engaged. I mean, these were all people getting married. And it was basic questions like, who should be in charge of finances? Do you want to have children? And there were people like turning around and arguing. It was like we walked into this thing and I was a little nervous and I was like, high five. Like, we are doing awesome.
Yeah.
The big stuff.
That is awesome.
It was really.
To do it in front of other people.
We were in a whole, it was
a little tough.
Pandemonium. We were like, what is going on here? Yeah.
Yes. No.
But it's amazing how people don't talk about, we get focused on the day, the wedding, and then we don't focus on the marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, heaven forbid, there's some non-negotiables in there of like, I have to have kids. I don't want to have kids. Like,
absolutely.
It'd be really nice to get that out beforehand so you feel like you're coming in informed. And it's easy to become infatuated. Love someone, and
that's when they're perfect.
And then you don't ask those hard questions because you don't want to mess that up, But it will all come out eventually. So that's a great thing to do. Another idea is, just dedicating time to talking about hard stuff, especially when kids come in the picture. I'll have couples, they'll come weekly for a little bit and then we'll start spacing it out, and then on our off weeks I want them to be having a conversation about the state of things, the state of the union, how are things going, and being able to just set apart time to talk about your relationship. And it's so not hard. It's not just let's talk when things are hard, right? Because then it's a scary time. But if it's like, we're checking in on, our relationship, and you're asking those hard questions of like, how are you feeling about our home? How are you feeling about our relationship? How are you feeling about the
parenting?
Kids? Yeah. Like, and those are important to ask. And if you've just built that habit, then it's not going to be, how do you feel about our marriage when things are going really sour? That might just turn into a
like
conflict.
An argument.
Right. So that's super valuable. I encourage people to have 15 minutes a day where they're not talking about kids, work, or money too. That is when we talk about building connection and having that firm foundation, it's just so easy to get very logistics based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to that transactional relationship of like, well, did you do the dishes? Did you do that? And it's like, where's, that's not why you got married. You didn't get married because you love talking about the dishes. Like,
Right.
You got married because you had similar passions, similar dreams, and being able to reconnect with that is a great preventative measure for when, things get really hard later. Like, we've built up our foundation.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I know.
Is there anything else you wanted to ask?
Blended families. We got a question about blended families.
Okay.
Do you have a lot of...
I do. That is pretty common working with co-parenting, so either, I work with couples that are in the process of divorcing and it's wanting to, work with the family, and my colleague, she works a lot with kids, and so a lot of times, like, she'll work with the kids. I'll work with the parents, whether that's, divorcing couples or couples that are about to marry with blended families. And that's been amazing, the way that we've laid out the practice, and I'm hoping after this baby comes, we'll have a more, like, grand opening and, promote kind of that element of our work, because it is so helpful that the kids have an advocate, so they have a person that they can just talk to unfiltered, and they sign all the paperwork. So, I can talk to the other therapist about what's going on. I can share my stuff. She can share her stuff. And then I'm working with the parents on, and it kind of goes back to premarital type questions in a sense of like, okay, what does it look like to discipline the other people's children?
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure
That's a
this is
really
tough.
common question. What do you want to be called? Or if they don't already live together, what do we want to do with the housing situation? So that has been super helpful, and then we'll come together as a family. So it will be,
That's wonderful.
I've got, I'm kind of keeping tabs on the parents. Sometimes I'll intervene, referee, and be like, well, we don't need to go there. And then the children have an advocate. So they have someone that they've talked to that can maybe help encourage and facilitate the conversation, bring up things that they had brought up in their own sessions, because it can be overwhelming. I think family therapy is incredibly helpful, but when you do have younger children, it can be tough to put them in a room of 5+ people and be like, okay, tell us how you feel about everything.
Oh, yeah. I love that holistic approach, because you're exactly right. It's taking the story from the kids' perspective and the parents, and then you being able to talk to the other therapist and putting a whole big picture together. I think that's really novel and amazing. Yeah.
It's great. I can't envision doing it any other way, because before my coworker Amelia, before she came on, it was me just juggling the family. There's some ethical issues with me playing multiple roles, and so it's been so nice to be able to separate that out a little bit, and I think it's definitely proven to work well. So excited to see what comes of that, but this baby's got to come out first.
So you're off Church Street.
Off Church Street, if you know where Taco Bell is. They're like headed toward like Crescent Church. I'm right on the corner of that.
Perfect.
And so a little building, no sign yet. Just with, it was a blessing, but I didn't have to mark it, I think, just because of COVID.
Everybody needs therapy right now.
When I came in, I had a full caseload pretty quickly. And then obviously with the baby, I was like, well, there's no reason to start marketing now. And so I don't have a sign up yet. But again, in June, I plan to do something a little more formalized so that people can find us.
Website or social media?
Website is greenvilletherapygroup.com. Somehow I managed to get that name.
That's awesome.
I know. I was like typing in domains. I was like, is this seriously not taken?
Reserve.
Exactly. But realistically, we're a 2-man group right now. We'll expand in the future. So people are typically like, oh yeah, I do therapy at Caroline Pennell. And I'm like, there is another name, but we just haven't formalized it yet. So greenvilletherapygroup.com.
Great. Well, thank you,
can find us
Caroline, for
there.
everything.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Wishing you a safe and swift delivery.
Thank you.
Yes.
Swift.
I appreciate
Swift.
Yes, that is the goal. That is the goal. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We hope you found this helpful. And if you have any feedback or any suggestions that you want to hear, we would love to hear from you. So thanks again. Have a good one.
Thank you.